They removed a book from your Bible, not because it was false, because it was too true, and buried inside it was your name. There is a verse in Genesis, chapter 5, that most people read past without stopping. 7 words. And Enoch walked with God and was not. That's it. No explanation, no follow-up, no death certificate, no burial site. One man entered the biblical record and simply ceased to exist within it. Now ask yourself, when has the Bible ever done that? When has it ever introduced a figure, stripped him to a single line, and moved on? It doesn't. Not with Noah, not with Abraham, not with Moses, but with Enoch? Silence. Why? Here's what they don't tell you in Sunday school. Enoch wasn't just a patriarch. He was an author. He left a book, a scroll so detailed, so cosmologically precise, so dangerously specific about the nature of God, angels, humanity, and the divine architecture of the soul, that the councils who assembled your Bible made a deliberate choice. Cut it. Bury it. Call it heresy. And for nearly 1,000 years, it worked. But here's what they couldn't predict. The scroll survived. It was preserved in the highlands of Ethiopia, copied by hand in the ancient language of Ge'ez, carried in secret by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church while Rome was busy burning everything it feared. And then, in 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce walked out of Abyssinia with 3 copies. The Book of Enoch was back. So the question is no longer, where has it been? The question is, what does it say that still makes institutional religion nervous? Stay with me, because what's coming isn't a theology lecture. It is a deconstruction. Let's start with what the book actually claims. And I want you to hold this without immediately reaching for comfort or rejection. Just hold it. The Book of Enoch opens with a cosmology, a description of the divine structure of reality, the heavens, their layers, their inhabitants, their function. It reads less like mythology and more like a technical document. But then, it shifts. It introduces a group called the Watchers, 200 beings described as sons of God who descended to earth by choice. Not cast down, not punished, not expelled. They chose to descend. And here is where your Sunday school version begins to crack. The standard reading of Genesis 6, which is the canonical echo of this story, frames what happened as corruption, sin, rebellion. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, took them as wives, and the result was catastrophe. That is the version designed to keep you passive. Because if the descent was rebellion, then the lesson is, stay in your lane. Don't reach beyond what you've been assigned. Don't ask questions that haven't been pre-approved. But the Book of Enoch tells a different story. These watchers were described as radiant, as beings of fire and light. They were, according to the text, the B'nai ha-Elohim, the sons of God. Not rogue agents, not demons in waiting. They were divine, and they came down. Now, here is the question you need to sit with. What if the problem wasn't that they came? What if the problem was what they taught? Because the text is specific. The Watchers didn't just arrive and cause chaos. They transmitted knowledge, metallurgy, astronomy, herbology, the reading of omens, the secrets of cosmetics and adornment. Knowledge. And that's where the story gets dangerous. Because there's a pattern in every culture that has ever tried to control a population. Restrict access to knowledge. Frame curiosity as sin. Make the questioner the problem. The Book of Enoch preserves a cosmology where knowledge itself descended into the human world, and the powers that assembled the canon made sure that story didn't make it into your Bible intact. Why does that matter? Because it changes who you are in the story. Here is where I need to reframe everything I've said so far, because I've been describing this as a story about ancient beings and cosmic events. But the Book of Enoch is not primarily a history. It is a mirror. And the mystics who treasured it, the Dead Sea Scroll communities, the early followers of Jesus before the councils standardized everything, the Ethiopian church scholars, they didn't read it as mythology. They read it as psychology. They read it as a map of the human interior. So let me run the translation for you. The Watchers are not extraterrestrial beings you need to believe in literally. Whether or not you accept them as historical figures, and there are serious scholars on both sides of that, the function they serve in the text is what matters. They are the part of you that descended into matter with full awareness, the part that chose form, that chose limitation, that chose this, the confusion, the weight, the forgetting, because something in it understood that light only knows itself as light when it has met darkness. The Nephilim, the giants born from this union of divine and earthly, are not monsters. They are the distortions that emerge when power operates without wisdom. Think about that in contemporary terms. We live in a world of spectacular knowledge. We have split the atom. We have sequenced the genome. We have put supercomputers in every pocket. And we are more confused about meaning than at any point in recorded history. That is the Nephilim condition. Knowledge without wisdom. Power without grounding. Gifts deployed without the one thing that could make them sacred: remembrance. The flood, and this is where the Book of Enoch makes its most uncomfortable argument. The flood was not God's rage. It was the universe's reset function. And it is not only ancient history. You have experienced the flood, not in Noah's terms, but in yours. The relationship that collapsed and took 5 years of your identity with it. The career that ended and left you standing in a life you no longer recognized. The belief system that quietly dissolved under the pressure of your own lived experience until the God you were handed no longer fit the questions you were actually asking. That was the flood. And here is what the Book of Enoch says about the person who survives it. They are ready to walk with God. Not before the flood, after it. The collapse isn't the punishment. It's the prerequisite. And now we arrive at Enoch himself. The text says Enoch walked with God, but the Hebrew is more specific than that. The word translated walked is hitalech, a reflexive, continuous verb. It doesn't mean he took a single walk. It means he kept walking, habitually, repeatedly, in an ongoing orientation. He didn't have a mountaintop moment and return to normal life. He became the practice. And then the text does something that has no parallel in Genesis. It says he was not. Ki laka oto Elohim. God took him. No death, no tomb, no mourning. He was translated. The Greek Septuagint, the earliest translation of the Hebrew Bible, renders this even more explicitly. Enoch was not found because God transferred him. This is not metaphor functioning as decoration. This is the text making a specific, technical claim. A human being, through the practice of sustained conscious alignment with the divine, underwent a transformation so complete that the normal end of a human life did not apply to him. Now, here is the dangerous part. Here is the part the councils who removed this book from your canon understood very clearly. If Enoch ascended, not through grace dispensed from above, not through sacrifice, not through priestly mediation, but through his own sustained practice of walking with the divine, then ascension is not a gift reserved for the extraordinary. It is a process available to anyone who walks. That idea, structurally, institutionally, is catastrophic for any religious system that requires you to need it. If you can walk into the divine yourself, you don't need a gatekeeper. And the Book of Enoch doesn't stop there. Because Enoch doesn't just ascend, he receives a vision. And in that vision, in the section scholars call the similitudes, he sees a figure. He calls this figure the Son of Man. Now, pay attention here, because this is where the thread connects to something you already know. The phrase Son of Man appears in the Gospels 87 times. It is, statistically, the most common thing Jesus called himself. Not Son of God, not Messiah, Son of Man. And the scholarly consensus across confessional lines is that Jesus was drawing directly on the Enochic tradition when he used that title. He was invoking a figure his audience already knew from a text that was, at that time, widely circulated and deeply respected. The Son of Man in Enoch is not a military conqueror. He is not a supernatural being descending in fire. He is described as the one who reveals what is hidden, the one who was named before the sun and stars were created, the one in whom the Spirit of righteousness dwells. This is the figure Jesus was positioning himself in relation to, and the implication, the one the councils could not allow to stand in plain text, is this: the Christ was not an interruption in human history. The Christ was the completion of a pattern that Enoch saw and named centuries before Bethlehem. Descent, forgetting, collapse, remembrance, return. That pattern has a name in the Book of Enoch, and Jesus lived it publicly so that the pattern could be seen. I want to slow down here, because everything I've described, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Flood, Enoch's ascension, the Son of Man, the Christ pattern, it all converges on a single question. And it's not a theological question. It's a personal one. Where are you in this pattern? Because here is what I've noticed in nearly every tradition that has ever taken the Book of Enoch seriously. They are not primarily interested in what the text says about ancient history. They are interested in what the text says about now. The Dead Sea community at Qumran copied the Book of Enoch more than any other text except Deuteronomy and Isaiah. They weren't historians. They were people living in the desert, having walked away from the temple establishment because they believed it had become corrupt. They read Enoch as a document about their own moment, about what happens when institutions built to carry divine knowledge instead use that knowledge to consolidate power, about what the flood moment demands from the person who survives it, about what kind of walking is required. You are living in a version of that moment. The institutions that were supposed to hold the sacred, the churches, the seminaries, the doctrinal frameworks that once gave people a container for the deepest questions of their lives, they are hemorrhaging authority. Not because faith is dying, because people can feel the difference between genuine sacred transmission and institutional management of access to the sacred. And the hunger that remains, the one that has brought you to a channel called Unwritten Doctrine, to a conversation about a book that was deliberately removed from your Bible, that hunger is not confusion. That hunger is the walking. You are in the Enoch sequence. You have already survived something. Something has already been flooded out of your life. A certainty, a framework, a version of God that couldn't survive contact with the actual texture of your experience. And you are standing now in the aftermath, in the silence after the flood, asking the question Enoch must have been asking. What do I do with what I now know? Here is what Enoch did. He walked. Not dramatically, not with an audience, not with a platform. He walked, hitalech, in sustained, habitual, daily alignment with something larger than his own confusion. And the text says that walk transformed him so completely that death itself had no final claim on him. Now, I am not making a metaphysical promise to you. I am not telling you that you will physically ascend if you do the right practices. I am telling you something more immediate than that. The Christ pattern that Enoch named and that Jesus enacted is not a pattern about supernatural exception. It is the most natural thing a human being can move toward. Descent into limitation and forgetting. You have already done this. Collision with the Nephilim forces, the distortions that emerge when gifted people operate without wisdom. You have already lived this. The flood, the collapse, the demolition of what was false. You have already survived this. What remains is the walking. And the walking looks like this. It looks like refusing to outsource your encounter with the sacred to an institution that needs your dependence more than it needs your freedom. It looks like taking the questions you have been told are too dangerous about divine origins, about the nature of consciousness, about what Jesus was actually claiming when he said, "You are gods," and following them without flinching. It looks like reading the texts they buried, not as rebellion, as inheritance reclamation. The Book of Enoch was not removed from your Bible because it was weak or false or primitive. It was removed because it described a human being who needed no intermediary, who walked directly, who was taken. And here is the line I want to leave in you. The scroll was not lost. It was held in reserve. Held until the moment when enough people had been flooded out of inherited certainty, stripped of the frameworks that no longer fit, left standing in honest bewilderment, and were finally ready to walk without the permission of the ones who buried the map. That moment is now. You are not a passive receiver of divine grace, waiting to be found worthy. You are, according to the oldest cosmological tradition your Bible draws from but does not fully acknowledge, a being of descended light. You came here on purpose. You went into the forgetting on purpose. And everything that has felt like loss, the faith that collapsed, the certainty that eroded, the God that no longer fit, none of that was punishment. It was preparation. Enoch walked with God, and he was not. The not is not an erasure. The not is a translation. The question is not whether you believe that happened to him. The question is whether you are willing to take seriously the possibility that the same pattern, descent, collapse, remembrance, return, is not ancient history. It is your biography. Walk.